Hi, sorry about that. I must never have, I don't know how it happened, but I must never have ended my my previous one.
Okay, as long as you're here now, that's all that
Yes.
counts.
Thing is, that previous one was recorded, so it was probably like 12 hours long, the recording, if it stayed on. Hey, Doris. How are you, Doris?
I'm good, Rabbi. How are you doing?
Good. Very good to see you.
Thank you.
Hey, Liz. How you feeling?
I'm feeling okay. Just a little like I have a cold.
Okay. Well, should get speedily completely healed.
Thank you.
You heard that? Who's that?
Hi, Dad.
From who? Hi, Andy.
How are you?
Good. Your Milwaukee group is ready.
Okay. That's very important to me. Very important. Okay. Lois' thing says it's connecting to audio. Years ago, I used to attend a class by a remarkable teacher. His name was Rav Mordechai Dolinsky. He was one of the mashgichim. Mashgiach in a yeshiva means somebody who's paying attention to your spiritual growth, not just your learning, but also just where you're holding spiritually in general. So he was one of the mashgichim at a yeshiva called Torah Or, and my brother Yaakov was learning there, and he had already become close to Rav Mordechai Dolinsky. And often I would spend Shabbos with my brother, and we would listen to his Friday night shmooze. He would give a Friday night shmooze. It would be done by candlelight. It was, these were, let's say, a candle that was lit like before Shabbos started. And there was a break. The way they did davening in the yeshiva was they do like mincha and Kabbalah Shabbos, Kabbalat Shabbat, and then they'd have a break before they did Mariv. And during the break, you would learn. So during that learning session, he had a class, and you'd go down to this room, and it was like very sort of mystical feeling already. And he had a sort of piercing eyes and a long beard, and he looked the part. And he would often talk about deeper things. For us, it felt like he was talking about the deepest things in the world. And so I remember one of those, he was remarking about this Torah portion. This Torah portion is called Vayechi, and Vayechi Yaakov, and Yaakov lived. And so it starts off talking about life for the first sentence, and then starts talking about death. And it actually, this Torah portion has the death of Yaakov, and it has the death of Yosef in it. So he just found that to be ironic. The truth is, we also have Chai Sarah. We call it Chai Sarah, the life of Sarah, and that one is also just introducing the death of Sarah to us. So it allows us to focus on what is life and what is death, it also allows us, because in Chayei Sarah, but also here, there's a focus on burial. And this is something that's very important in Jewish practice, to make sure that the body is buried in the ground. And so that allows us to focus on what the body is. Depending on what the point of the conversation is, life and death can be described differently. Like if you're talking about the time a person spends on this plane of existence, interacts with the people around them. So life means until they stop breathing, until they appear to be no longer. Imagine that you have friends that are gathered around somebody, another friend. Let's say the friend's name is Bob. So you're all in the room with Bob, and Bob is experiencing his last moments. And so you decide to step out, get a cup of coffee, and you come back in and you see everyone looks distraught, and you ask them what happened, and they said, Bob's gone. You know what that means. What that means is that Bob, as you interacted with him, is no longer there. Bob's body's there. Bob looks exactly the same as he's always looked. There's nothing that your senses picked up that is still not there, but you also understand what it means that when they say Bob's not there. So that part that has gone, or that's no longer there, we often call the soul. And in most conversations about a human being, there's a soul and there's a body. They're two separate things. In fact, we even have a blessing. After you go to the bathroom, we have a blessing that describes the wonder of the whole system. And when explaining some of the language of the blessing, Mafli Lassos, that does wonders, that's part of it, is like, how do body and soul stay together? After all, again, part of this problem is that we tend to speak in sound bites about these subjects, and the truth is that words are not enough to really contain the idea. They just carry with them little bits. And so after a while, you learn not to hold too tightly onto anything that's said about this subject, because you're getting little bits. And again, depending on the reason for your conversation, there might be different bits, and they may be characterized different ways. And sometimes in ways that almost contradict each other. But that's not because the people really mean to contradict each other. It's just that we're getting just these little bits, and with these little bits, we have just a tiny bit of understanding And so, for the purposes of our conversation, it sounds like we know what we're talking about. So we say such and such, and then another time you say such and such. But in neither case did you really ever capture that. You certainly didn't capture the entirety of it. We don't really capture very much about it. So when we talk about these subjects, you do it with humility and also with a particular focus. So oftentimes the body and soul are characterized as coming almost from different worlds. The body is from the earth and the soul is from the heavens. And the human being, therefore, becomes a kind of marriage between heaven and earth. The two great contexts of creation. The soul is made up of substances that are not physical. Even to call them substances is borrowed language, poetic language. But the soul is made up of materials that are not of the physical world, which means they're not subject to the senses. And the body is made up of the earth. It is made up of material matter, and all of it is technically subject to the senses. So the great wonder is, how can they come together? How do they meet? How do they stay together? What does it even mean to call it together? Because if the soul is not made up of matter, then it shouldn't have place, where it shouldn't take up space. And if it doesn't have matter, it shouldn't connect to something made of matter. How do they stay together? I once heard a rabbi, he was quoting the Maharal of Prague. I think it was Rabbi David Gottlieb from Or Sameach. May he be healthy and live a long life. And I think it was him who was quoting the Maharal, and he sort of paraphrased it. I shouldn't have quoted him because it would upset him, because he's so careful with his language and everything that he says. So now I'm thinking it could have been the Maharal, could have been the Ramchal. I think it was the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. But just like part of what keeps them together is eating food and drinking water. If a person doesn't eat food or drink water, eventually the soul will separate from the body, which means that this mysterious connection is somehow fueled by pizza, which just adds to the mystery of it. Like, how could they even be together? So that's one of the sort of contexts where we talk about life. The soul and the body staying together. And when the soul leaves, when Bob is gone, this person is no longer alive in that sense. There is a Gemara which says Yaakov Avinu lo meis, that Yaakov didn't die. And then the Gemara asks, what do you mean he didn't die? Our Parsha says not only did he die, he was embalmed. He was eventually, they mourned for him. And then they eventually buried him. And so it goes on to say, well, that's not what we mean. There's another way of talking about life and death. Life in this sense, there's a kind of continuity of life that comes from the fact that he has continuity, that his children live after him as expressions of his person. His ideas live after him as an expression of his person. The Gemara says, righteous people, tzaddikim, even when they're dead, they're alive. They're called alive. They're called alive. Wicked people, even when they're alive, they're called dead. So there's another conversation. There's another way of speaking about life and death. There's something we call the bundle of life. There's some kind of source of life that we can connect to. There's something called the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. Eitz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba. It's a tree of life for those who cleave to it. And that kind of life seems to be impervious to death, to those who cleave to it. There is we have a notion Moshe Shapiro was once giving a hesped, blessed memory, was giving a hesped for Moshe Feinstein at one of his Thursday night classes. And he quoted from the Torah portion of Chukas, Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is the law of the Torah. That section deals with the paraduma, with the ashes of the red heifer. But in one point, it says, Adam ki yamus ba'ohel, if a person dies in the tent. And it's talking about if you're in a tent or a room with a dead body, that everything in that room or tent becomes impure just from being there with a dead body. It's talking about the impurity of a dead body and then how to resolve that with the ashes of the red heifer. But it uses this term with regard to Adam. If an Adam dies in the Torah, dies in the tent, and so he the Gemara says, "Ein divrei Torah miskaimim ela b'misha meimis atzmo aleihem," that the words of Torah only remain if the person who taught them or said them killed himself in the tent of Torah. Now, what would it mean to kill yourself in the tent of Torah? So he used the example of a sculptor. Maybe he was thinking of Michelangelo. When Michelangelo was asked about his process, let's say he's sculpting an elephant. So Michelangelo would say, he looks at the marble, he sees the elephant, and then he carves away everything that's not the elephant. So what would it mean? He didn't actually use that example, but he was using the example of a sculptor, because he said chukah, like a machokek, is like a sculptor. It's somebody who carves away at stone. So he was suggesting that a person could carve away everything that isn't Torah And whatever's left will last forever. In other words, that aspect of you that is connected to Torah or imbued with Torah, that aspect of you will live forever. And what does it mean, me misatzmo? It's like you're killing the other aspects of yourself that aren't Torah. So that's another kind of plane for talking about life and death. And maybe this is partly what some of those other teachings meant, that there's an aspect of our person that we consider ourselves, but is not really ourselves. It's not our essence. And in that teaching, it was sort of saying, do away with that, and everything else will, sort of live forever. We have this notion that we existed before we were born, and we will continue to exist after we die, that birth and death are just ways of talking about stages in the path of our being. They aren't truly the beginning of us, and they're not truly the end of us. That doesn't mean that they're not the beginning of something or the end of something. They may be the beginning of something and the end of something, but whatever that something is not the essential us. That's what they might be suggesting. That also might be similar to that notion of it's the tree of life that you cleave to. In other words, whatever that it lives forever, that's the part of you that that cleaved to it, and everything else doesn't. The other things don't necessarily continue, but they weren't the essential you anyways. So let's say somebody had great wealth for a big chunk of his life, and then he lost the wealth. And because he lost the wealth, he lost a certain amount of power. He lost a certain amount of access to people of power, people of wealth. There were certain elements of his lifestyle that he no longer can enjoy. And he's sitting around talking to a friend, and a friend might say, those were never important. Those were never you. You may have thought they were you when you were flying in a private jet to this place or that place and given entree to exclusive locations or access to certain types of people. You may have thought that was you, but the lesson that I learned when I no longer had those things was they were not, because the essence of you doesn't go away. So if you're suddenly feeling like you went away, that's because you were granting you-ness to things that weren't you. Objects are not you. I feel like they might be sometimes, but they're not me. If I lost all my objects, I would still be here. It's part of the lesson of Moshe with the burning bush. Moshe goes to the burning bush and he sees this bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed. We don't know what the lesson is right there. But later on, the Jewish people are standing at Mount Sinai. And at some point they stand back, and Moshe asks them to come back closer, and they refuse, and they say it's like a burning fire. And if we stay closer, we're going to be consumed. Now, Moshe is telling them that's a mistake, at least in one of them, but they stay back. Now, when they describe that, when they say that it's a fire and will be consumed, that's a real experience. They're feeling that. They're really feeling that. And ask yourself, if you ask them, let's say you could get them to calm down for a second, you could say, So Moshe is in the fire? What? Because according to you, you have to step away because you're going to be consumed. So Moshe's in the fire. Yeah, so they would say, yeah, he's not normal. He's not human. He's not human. That's why he's able to be in the fire. But the thing is, Moshe didn't think that about himself. So what was Moshe thinking? Why did Moshe know he could be in the fire and he wouldn't be consumed? Because Moshe saw the burning bush, and he saw that the bush wasn't consumed. For our purposes, I'm suggesting that that's what this means. In other words, that there's an essence of your being that is not consumed by the flames of the fire. The other stuff could be. And that is frightening for anybody who feels like they are their things, or they are their power, or they are their access, or they are their popularity, they are their celebrity, they are their beauty. I'm not saying, I feel that, and we all feel that, but it's not true. We aren't those things. It's very likely part of the lesson of aging, that as we age, many of those things change, and they don't look the way they once did, and they don't work the way they once did. Maybe it's a sort of gift, a gradual lesson to allow us to separate a little bit from these things and to recognize that they're not me. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik had a stroke towards that. I don't remember how old he was, but he lived and taught for many years after his stroke. Well, when he had his stroke, he wrote an article right after the stroke, not during the stroke. He wrote an article that was, I think, printed in the tradition, in the journal, the Torah journal tradition, I think it was printed there, where he talked about how his arm, I don't remember which arm it would be, he had his complete mental faculties and he could talk. So I'm assuming he had a stroke on his right side. I don't know how, I don't remember how it works. But whatever it was, wherever he had the stroke, he couldn't, his arm was lifeless. He couldn't move his arm anymore. And it forced him to contemplate his relationship to his arm. Because it just hung there lifeless and seemed to be foreign to who he was at this point. It no longer felt like him. And he felt like it was a gift that allowed him to recognize that he isn't his body. He isn't his body. That's a very extreme thing to have to go through, but certainly many of us go through this when we let's say if we retire, or our career changes, or our relationships change, we contemplate who we are perhaps afterwards, because something that we so tightly connected to and thought of as our person is no longer there. So does that mean I'm diminished? Does that mean that a part of me doesn't exist anymore? Part of me. So this is a doorway to seeing that's not the case, that those things were never me. I've shared with you before that there was this person, I think died in around 1970, possibly. He was called Ramana, and he was a sort of sage in India. And so his practice, or at least the practice that he was most noted for, was asking yourself, who is I? Who is I? You could add layers to it, like think about your hands and you say, my hands are not me. Think about your feet. Think to yourself, my feet are not me. So if they are not me, then who is I? My arms are not me, my legs are not me. If they are not me, who is I? And you just, so you can go down this exercise. You could just ask yourself, who is I? When I say I, who is that? What is that? For many years, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, may he live long and in good health, would go on these trips with Moshe Shapiro, the blessed memory. What happened was there were people who would be gathered to go on a destination trip, which would have some theme. They tended to be wealthier because it cost a lot of money to go on these trips. The way they got Ramosha to go on it was they made it a fundraiser for projects that he was involved in. So the people that went on it, I don't know how much it wasn't, you didn't have to be like rich, but it would cost money to go on these trips. They tended to be wealthier people. And they'd go to, like, let's say Prague. And in Prague, Ramosha would give shiurim from the Maharal of Prague. If they went to Vilna, he'd give shiurim from the Vilna Gaon. You know, they would be an elaboration, elucidation of some point that the Maharal was making, or some point that the Vilna Gaon was making, or wherever they were going, it would be something like that. And along with Ramosha, they needed, because it was a trip, you know, you needed to provide as much bang for your buck. So they invited Rabbi Tatz to come along, and he would give shiurim. And they invited this Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch, who was like a brilliant kind of historian, and he'd go on these trips. So whenever he would say to me, why don't you come on these trips? All you have to do is get a couple of people to go with you, and then you could go on it for free. Yes, I never even attempted to go there for it. But afterwards, he'd say to me, I have a CD of Ramosha shiurim from those trips. I'll send you the CD. And he would always send me like a CD of the different shiurim. So I don't know if it was that experience, or if he had already been doing it on his own anyways. He had been gathering the classes of Ramosha Shapiro. Ramosha Shapiro was associated with different institutions, but they were never his full-time thing. So his full-time thing was giving classes. That's what he did. And he gave, 20 something classes a week, something like that. And starting about 45 years ago or 50 years ago, starting with when they started with cassette players, his classes would be recorded. And so Rabbi Tatz would hear that somebody had attended Ramosha's class on the 13 Principles of Faith, a class that would meet every week for a few years. So there were quite a few shiurim, and he'd find the guy who used to tape it, and the guy would end up sending him like his stuff. So he gathered a wealth of these shiurim over the years. And so, like in the last couple of years, when every once in a while I'd be talking to or writing to Akiva Tatz, and he would say to me, I'm going to send you a hard drive of all the shiurim. And I didn't make much of it. First of all, I didn't know what to do with a hard drive. I wouldn't know. I didn't think I would know what to do with it. And anyways, I just felt, I don't know why, but I didn't jump at it. So, but it was like for the last couple of years, he mentioned this. And then I have a student who started to really get into Ramosha's shiurim. His name is Yinon Gurevich, who now is at YU. And he's like seriously into Ramosha's Torah. And he had, on a couple occasions, talked to me about something. And I told him that Rabbi Tatz has a lot of these shiurim. You should write to Rabbi Tatz and ask him if he could send you the shiurim on these topics. And the first time I think I sent just a letter. Rabbi Tatz, this is Yinon Gurevich, student of mine, and etc. And then they carried on their own correspondence. So a couple days ago, a different student of mine who was friendly with Yinon, Moshe Latkin, happens to come from Israel. He's here for like a week and a half. And the first day that I see him, I notice this brown envelope. And I go over and look at the envelope, and it has my name on it. And then it says from Akiva Tatz. And I realized this somehow must be that hard drive. And so somehow, Gurevich arranged it. He stopped in London because Rabbi Tatz is in London. Moshe Latkin stopped in London. And some student who was picking him up, a friend of his, apparently stopped by Akiva Tatz. Somehow I got it. I ended up with this thing. So it's like, these hard drives, it's like this.
I've got hard drives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just nothing. It looks like nothing. Doesn't feel like anything. It doesn't have weight practically. So I got it like 2 days ago. So this morning, for the first time, I plugged it in, not knowing, but I was told you don't have to know very much. You just plug it in. Yeah. It lets you know what to do.
It sees it.
Yeah.
You start opening up folders.
You start opening up folders. So I am starting to open it up, and I was just completely blown away by what's on there. There's just thousands of audio recordings of shiurim, and maybe at least 100 video recordings, all in Hebrew, because that was his language. He also spoke Yiddish, but these were all in Hebrew. The topics, like the subjects, were just, they were just the most incredible. Like I was sharing with Lois earlier today, that there are these stories of Rabba Bar Bar Chana. He's called Rabba Bar Bar Chana. I think there are 16 altogether. They are these wild stories that appear in the Gemara that he tells. Some of them are not totally stories. Some of them are wisdom that he heard from sailors, but some of them are stories, and they're wild. And they captured the attention of Rav Nachman of Breslov, who has a commentary on them. The Vilna Gaon has a commentary on them. So Ramosha has shiurim on those stories of Rabba Bar Bar Chana. So I looked at it. There's over 100. Each one of them is over an hour classes on just those stories of Rabba Bar Bar Chana. And I had heard, besides hearing Gemara from him, I heard his classes. He taught us about the 13 principles of faith. They're in there. There's other classes that I heard from him about the Perek Chelek and Sanhedrin are in there. And there's it just blew my mind what's there, what he has collected, what he had collected. And then I was just watching just one of the video ones, and I was completely transported. And there it is on my computer screen. There he is, teaching. And again, there's a whole series of classes he's going to be teaching there, and he's teaching there. But while I was watching it, I started to cry and because it was like he was there. It was like he was there. Now, I don't know. I mean, I've heard audio stuff from him before. I don't know what it was about this moment that was more profound than any other moment. But it was just like beyond words. So then I'm thinking, like, what is it when I'm listening to him or when I see him? It's not him. It's not him. He's not here. It's not him. So what is it? What am I connecting to? What it feels like him, it looks like him, but it's not him in the sense of Bob is gone. Ramosha is gone. Like Bob is gone. The part of Ramosha is little ticks and his little and his beard and the wrinkles in his face that we were all fascinated with, and all those little details, that is gone. The opportunity to stand next to him is gone. The interaction where he's fumbling with a button on my sweater while he's answering a question, that is gone. But what is that? So part of it, I was thinking, well, maybe there's a part of him that exists within me, because of the Torah that I have from him. And because I already have a foundation, this is just sort of adding to, it connects to that, and it's sort of adding to the foundation. So he doesn't exist on the screen, certainly. He doesn't exist on whatever materials are in the hard drive, but maybe he sort of exists within me. And this is building on what exists already within me. And that's something that I need to explore more. There's something there, but there's also this thing which he said about Ramosha Feinstein, which is that his Torah, that's what I am connecting to here. It's not a poem he wrote. His Torah lives forever. Not just his Torah, but in a sense, he lives forever in the Torah. That aspect of him lives forever. Just like he was saying about Ramosha Feinstein. That we live forever. We live forever. There is a part of us that lives forever. And apparently we can have access to that from other people. You might think that what it means is, your soul lives forever, you go to the next world and you have some continued existence in the next world. But it seems to mean even here, and that seems to be when they say Yaakov, Avinu lo meis, that Yaakov didn't die. It means even here, not just talking about that his soul continued and is in the world to come or in the world of souls or wherever his soul is, but that he continues to live in a way you still have access to him. That we can still have access to those who've passed away if we try to access that aspect of their being, the aspect of their being that existed before they were born, that existed on this plane and moved on, but also somehow found connection to that thing which we call the tree of life. And that is that. I say, we do this again. Representing our local studio audience, we have Jason Mark. Jason saved me from being alone.
Next year, Rabbi.
Next year, because of the decision of certain people that January 1st should be.
Yes.
We demark.
I call it the
switch of
Goshen New Year.
Yes.
All right, yes, next, as Jason calls it, the Goyish year, next year. I will see you guys. I can, but who knows? We could be in touch with each other's essences, even without being in each other's presence. So who knows? Maybe we'll see each other before. But I look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday night. Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
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 All right, be well. Be well.